Why haven't you left? Is there something else? Bryce didn't answer Natalie's question. Instead, he glanced at her bandaged hands and said, "Get in the car." She pursed her lips, not saying anything. Remembering that inexplicable kiss, she felt wary of him. And after a moment of consideration, she said, "Thank you for your help, but I still have things to do, so I'll be leaving." She was about to turn around when his face suddenly darkened. He gritted his teeth and said, "Did I say you could leave?" She suddenly felt annoyed. She frowned as she looked at the strange man in front of her. She was so anxious, but he was still pestering her. She angrily took out $100 and handed it to him. "I know what you want, but I'm really in a hurry. Can I just pay you the fare?" Seeing that she was going to give him money again, Bryce squinted his eyes dangerously. This woman. She dared to challenge his dignity again. "I was going to take you to your son, but it seems like you don't want to go. So let's forget it. Driver." He let out a cold laugh and rolled up the window. He didn't even look at her as he drove away. She reacted immediately. What did he mean by that? Did he know where Liam was? Hope sparked in her heart. She didn't care about anything else. She chased after the car and shouted, "Hey, wait! What do you mean? Tell me!" She shouted a few times, but Bryce ignored her and instructed the driver to keep going. Seeing that the car was getting farther and farther away, Natalie gritted her teeth and quickened her pace. She cursed Bryce over and over in her heart. In the car, Bryce looked in the rearview mirror and saw how pitiful she looked chasing after them. For some reason, he was feeling mischievous, so he told the driver to drive slower but not stop, purposely teasing her. She chased the Cadillac for quite a distance, but it still did not stop. Natalie glared at it and knew that Bryce was deliberately making things difficult for her, but she couldn't stop because he knew where her son was. Even if she was exhausted to the point of begging, she had to find Liam. "Bryce, wait!" The car kept going for a while longer, and soon Natalie was no longer able to run. She was furious, especially because she knew he was doing this on purpose. Since she could go no further, she decided to stop. She was so tired that she squatted down on the street and stared hatefully after the car. She looked hilariously pathetic. The car backed up and the window slowly rolled down, revealing Bryce's arrogant smile. "Why aren't you running? Is that all you've got?" Natalie glared at him. In the face of his mockery, she wished that looks could kill. Seeing her expression, Bryce was amused. He smirked and said, "What are you still sitting there for? Did running make you stupid? Get in the car." She didn't dare to argue with him. She quickly got into the car and asked, "Do you know where Liam is?" He nodded and replied with a faint, "Mm-hmm." He didn't want to say too much. He only wanted to pique her interest. He was beginning to like teasing Natalie and seeing her get angry. She asked anxiously, "Where is he? Tell me, quickly. I've been dying of worry for the past few days." Bryce was annoyed, so he said, "You'll find out when we get there." Natalie finally felt relieved. She didn't say anything on the way, but just stared out the window at the scenery. Not long after, the driver arrived at one of the most famous homes in Seattle, the Clare family mansion. It sat on beautiful grounds in the neighborhood of Medina. It was an extremely large manor, as extravagant as a palace. Natalie looked at the magnificent buildings in front of her and felt slightly overwhelmed by the majesty of the place. Living here didn't just require money. The mansion was occupied by the local nobility, and only high-status individuals could live here. Even if she had been living in Seattle for many years, she would still have been unable to estimate the value of this mansion. But she knew just by looking at it that the power of the Clare family could not be underestimated. The Davidson family home, which was itself grand, could not compare to this place. She was confused when she got out of the car, but she did not show the shock on her face. Instead, she asked Bryce, "Is this your home? What did you bring me here for?" He did not answer. She did not seem to be attracted to him, like other women, and this surprised him. The way he looked at her softened a little. He didn't stop after he got out of the car. He walked straight to the front door of the mansion, and Natalie had no choice but to follow. "Mr. Clare, welcome home." As Bryce entered, the housekeepers greeted him in unison. The etiquette here was like that of an ancient court. Natalie had never seen such a sight. She was surprised, but pretended to be calm as she lowered her head and followed. After walking for some distance, Bryce brought her to a bedroom. He looked around and asked the butler, "Walter, where is my mom?" "In the back garden, sir," he replied respectfully. Bryce nodded and did not linger. Instead, he took Natalie to the garden. The further she walked, the more shocked she became. The style and construction of this house could not be measured in money. This must be how Alice felt when she entered Wonderland. As soon as they arrived in the back garden, Natalie saw a little boy squatting among the flowers, playing happily. She was overjoyed. She shouted excitedly, "Liam!" Liam had his back to his mother, but when he heard her voice, he quickly turned around. When he saw her, he dropped the flower in his hand and ran into her arms.
"Mommy, I missed you,"
he cried, pushing himself into Natalie's embrace to comfort her. This was the longest he had ever remained separated from his mother. Feeling how tightly she hugged him, he didn't feel that she might be hurt. He raised his head and said in surprise,
"I knew Daddy would save you."
Natalie didn't notice that Liam had called Bryce Daddy. Instead, she held him in her arms and looked at him worriedly. "How have you been? Are you hurt?" Liam shook his head.
"I'm not hurt. Grandma has been looking after me. Don't worry, Mommy."
After confirming that he wasn't hurt, Natalie was filled with relief. Then she realized what he had said. Grandma? She was puzzled. Only then did she see a woman wearing an expensive-looking dress sitting in a nearby summer house. She was sipping tea and watching them. She bore a resemblance to Bryce, so she was probably his mother. Natalie was surprised. Why had Liam been brought here? She was confused, but she still had to be polite. Pulling Liam up, she walked toward the lady. "Are you Bryce's mother? I hope it hasn't been too much trouble to take care of Liam." Michelle looked at Natalie. Her expression softened a little as she nodded and said, "No, I find him cute. It's not a problem." Natalie smiled gratefully. "Thank you for taking care of him." Michelle nodded. She felt that this girl was gentle and generous, with the temperament of a lady. No wonder she had raised a child as good as Liam. Her face eased a bit as she said, "It's nothing. I like him a lot. I heard that something happened to you. It's good that you came back." Natalie knew there was no point in saying any more. The Clare family did not require her gratitude, so after another word of thanks, she picked Liam up and prepared to leave. "Thank you again. I'll take him now." Liam blinked, looked at his mother, and then looked at his grandma. He felt that something was wrong, but he didn't say anything. Michelle looked at the boy and suddenly felt reluctant. "Are you really in such a hurry to leave? Do you have a place to stay?" She was the head of a very rich family, and she knew everything. She also knew a bit about what had happened to Natalie. Natalie nodded and said with sadness, "I came here because I had some things to deal with. Now that I've found Liam, I plan to go back to England tomorrow." With that, she looked at the distant sky and, lost in thought, muttered, "I won't come back again." Hearing her words, Bryce was stunned. His gaze swept across Natalie's clear and beautiful face. This mother and son had stormed in and messed up his life, and now she intended to leave. This kind of thing had never happened before. Even Michelle glanced at Liam with a slightly melancholic gaze. Then she looked at Bryce reproachfully. If her son had gotten married earlier, she would have a grandson about this age. She wouldn't need to sit here and grieve for what she had lost. After spending the past 2 days with this little boy, she had been utterly charmed by him. But in the end, he was not her grandson, so she could only sigh reluctantly. Just as Natalie was about to say goodbye to Bryce, Liam hugged his leg and asked,
"Mommy, why are we going to England? Shouldn't you be with Daddy? Why are we going away? Mommy, please don't leave Daddy."
He continued to cling onto Bryce's leg. He looked extremely pitiful. Natalie smiled awkwardly and quickly pulled him away. "Liam, he's not your dad, so don't call him that again, all right?" Tears of grief filled Liam's eyes.
"This is obviously Daddy. Why don't you recognize him?"
Seeing him like this, Natalie's heart felt sour. She could only coax him patiently. "Liam, you have to listen to me or I'll get angry." Liam let out a helpless sigh. With the weariness of an old man, he returned to Natalie feeling wronged. This scene almost broke Michelle's heart, especially Liam's tearful face, which looked just like Bryce's when he was young. Her heart became even more conflicted, but he wasn't her grandson. She did not urge them to stay, but let them leave. Bryce, on the other hand, didn't even look at Natalie and Liam. He didn't understand what was going on. He was confused by his own feelings, but he finally felt like he had gotten rid of his troubles. After leaving the Clare mansion, Natalie took Liam straight to her grandmother's house. There was no longer anyone or anything in this city that she would miss. The only person she cared about was her grandmother, who was getting older and older. When they arrived at the house, it was nearly evening. When the old woman saw Liam, she thought that Natalie's father could have caused some trouble for them, and this was the reason why Natalie hadn't returned home for 2 days, but she was so old, she could not do anything. She hugged Liam happily. She didn't ask where he had been. Although Liam had never met his great-grandma before this trip, the blood relationship between them had helped them to grow close very quickly. The old woman couldn't help but smile. Natalie felt hurt when she saw this. In order to control her, her father threatened her grandmother's life. It wasn't safe to leave her grandmother here. She wanted to take her grandmother away with them. She would be able to support all 3 of them in the UK. Over dinner, she said, "Grandma, I came back because I wanted to take you to England. I can take care of you." "No need to trouble yourself. And I don't think I'll be able to adjust in a foreign country at this old age." She had expected her to refuse, as she had refused earlier as well. But Natalie thought of giving it a try again. And as she was about to try and persuade her, her grandmother said, "I plan to return to the countryside in a few days. I have relatives there who will look after me. I'm old, and I can't take the city anymore. I just want to go back to my roots." Natalie sighed. It was as if a pair of large hands had grabbed her by the throat and were stifling her. In the end, she did not say anything. She understood her grandmother's temperament, and she knew that no matter how much she tried, it would be useless. Still, she could not help but feel guilty, and her voice was choked with emotion when she spoke. "But, Grandma, I'm really worried about you." Grandma's wrinkled face smiled. She shook her head and said, "Natalie, compared to your happiness, mine is nothing. You still have a lot of life ahead of you, so live it well, okay?" The old woman suddenly seemed to remember something. She said sadly, "Don't let your father ruin your life, my child." Episode